1915, Turkey attempted to destroy the Armenian people. The goal was to wipe out an entire ethnic group by a plan that included massacre, deportation, and starvation. In city after city, the Armenians perished. Over 1.5 million people met with death. Some Armenians survived this first genocide of modern times. They scattered to all parts of the globe and began to rebuild. My parents were among them. Throughout my life, I have heard stories about these terrifying events, about which the world has forgotten.
Our present thrust is that knowledge of the facts and the truth of the Armenian Genocide, deliberately planned and perpetrated by the then Turkish government, which left tremendous lasting scars upon the hearts and minds of millions of Armenians who today talk about it, who today have relatives they remember and they weep over.
And even though none of my relatives were involved in it, I still identify it very closely from the standpoint of an emotional feeling against the Turkish people and really against the American people to the degree that the people in power in this country really didn't do anything to put a stop to it.
The fact remains that, of course, in 1915, there were about over 2 million Armenians in Turkey. And at the end of the second year or third year, in 1916-17, there were less than 150,000. What happened to these people? They did not disappear, vanish from the earth.
These now silent and desolate highlands of Western Armenia were once the productive home of the Armenian people. Throughout history, be it in bondage or exile, Armenians have possessed a deep attachment to their land. The Turks now till the soil in this stern land beneath lofty mountains, a land Armenians were forced to abandon over 60 years ago. Biblical traditions hold that Noah's Ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, round whose base Armenians have lived continuously for 3,000 years. Mount Ararat is close to the Armenian heart. It is the symbol of Armenian nationhood. When you see the snow-capped peak, you know that God will deliver the Armenian people. I believe that one day Mount Ararat will belong to us again.
I have no doubt at all that they have a completely valid moral claim to the Armenian highlands. They had occupied that territory for well over 1,000 years before the Turks came into it. They continued to live side by side with the Turks, and they left it purely and simply because they were driven out by force. I can't imagine a clearer moral claim than that.
The historical Armenian homeland is situated at the crossroads of 3 continents. It occupies the region between the Black, Mediterranean, and Caspian Seas. 500 years before Christ, the Armenians had taken form as a distinct nation from the plain of Ararat to the headwaters of the Euphrates, to Lake Van. It is this land that the Armenians claim as their own. Because of her geographical location, Armenia has always been a buffer between East and West. She transmitted ideas and cultures between the continents. Constant struggle created a nation of warriors. Armenian kingdoms grew in power and size until under Dikran the Great in the 1st century BC, Armenia became the dominant power in the Middle East. At the beginning of the 4th century, the Armenians were the first people to accept Christianity as the state religion. An alphabet was invented, and a golden age began, lasting for almost 200 years. Within the pages of ancient manuscripts, miniature paintings depict the high level of Armenian civilization in literature, art, and architecture. After centuries of warfare, the Armenians established in the 10th century another kingdom with its capital at Ani, a city of 1,001 churches. Illustrated chronicles and the remaining structures provide a glimmer of the splendors of Ani. Ani to Van and beyond, there remains today the handiwork of Armenian architects and craftsmen standing in a landscape empty of Armenians. From the Asian heartland, Turkish armies moved westward across the rolling hills of Armenia, conquering all peoples in their path. 5 centuries under the Turkish rule that followed were the darkest in Armenian history. In the 1890s, Sultan Abdul Hamid became alarmed by the breakup of the Turkish Empire by European powers. The Armenians, although a subject people, retained their national consciousness as they continued to live on their historic territories. They refused to be assimilated. By the 20th century, many subject nations had attained freedom from Turkey. At the beginning of this century, Turkey, now reduced in size and power, decided to unite all Turkic peoples, but found that the Armenians in her midst blocked pan-Turkish expansionist dreams eastward. Turkish leaders then decided on a policy of extermination, of genocide, using as a pretext the religious and economic differences between Turks and Armenians.
The Turkish people as a whole, the common man, was not interested in technical advances, in education. The great landowners were wealthy. The mass of the people were either small shopkeepers or farmers. The Armenians had always been avid for education. The manufacturers, the great business firms, the productive people of the country were Armenians. And here they were, the cultured people, the educated people of the country, were the minority and supposed to be subservient to the rulers.
The Turkish leaders feared that someday the Armenians would also seek freedom. On the eve of the genocide, the Armenians of the city of Harper, as Armenians throughout the Turkish Empire, were a law-abiding people. Despite discrimination and persecution, the citizens of Harper went about their daily tasks. They did not suspect that within a month, most of them would perish at the hand of Turkish assassins. Among them were my grandparents. In 1915, the city of Van stood prosperous and proud. Years of Turkish tyranny had failed to break the spirit or the unity of her inhabitants. Within a year, the Armenians of Van also would be engaged in a life and death struggle. In the repression continued as the order of the day. The Turkish government joined Germany and the Central Powers during the First World War. As world attention was diverted on the war, the Turkish government undertook the systematic extermination of the Armenians. First, the Armenians in the Turkish army were disarmed and placed in slave work battalions.
As my grandfather related the events of 1915 to me many years later, at the time when he was Woodrow Wilson's ambassador to Turkey, his dealings were primarily with Talat Pasha, who was the Minister of Interior. And there was just no question, there was no question in my grandfather's mind that the extermination of the Armenian people was a calculated policy of the Turks.
Enver Pasha, Minister of War, Cemal Bey, and Talat Pasha formed the ruling group which ordered the genocide. Coded ciphered telegrams were sent to all governors of the provinces reading, "The government has decided to destroy completely all the Armenians living in Turkey. All Armenians from 5 years upward are to be taken out of towns and slaughtered."
I was there at the time of the deportations. The deportations, according to what the German missionaries from that area told us, were ordered by the Turkish government. They said it had been revealed to them by German government officials that these deportations were necessary to remove all minority groups from Turkey.
Beginning on April 24th, 1915, on secret government orders, the Armenians were arrested and forced out of their homes on the pretext that they were being moved to a non-military zone. Along the way, they were slaughtered.
Up in the hills there, you could see hundreds of bodies from a distance. And then at night, when the wind was strong, you could just smell the corpse.
At night, they were coming and searching and looking around to get beautiful girls, young girls, and all, to rape them, right before the mother's eyes. Our parents buried us into the sand, covered only my head out. The time that I escaped, and then I picked up the knife, and I headed to the Turk that coming near to me.